The other thing to keep in mind is that there is a vast difference between the economic system of the ancient Greco-Roman and Jewish world and that of our own. In the ancient world, society was sharply stratified, with the divide between the rich and poor being chasmic, and the poor's ability to bridge it almost non-existent. Indeed, the best option for upward mobility in the ancient world, at least among the poorest of the poor, was to sell oneself into slavery, which meant that the majority of the impoverished weren't poor because they were lazy or hard-hearted, but rather because they were born into poverty, and absent the favor of some rich benefactor would die in that same state. The same is not true for us, however. One of the benefits of our economy is that citizens in the United States experience astonishing upward mobility, historically speaking. Astonishing. A study published by the Brookings Institute showed that almost 30% of 20-year-olds, if you're 20, this is good news for you. Almost 30% of 20-year-olds in the bottom stratum of wealth will climb into the 2 upper strata within 10 years. 30% of 20-year-olds will go from the bottom to the top in only 10 years. That is a staggering statistic. The study also showed that 61% of Americans move up at least one stratum in their lifetime. Now, you will hear a massive amount of grumbling about the expanding wage gap and the decrease in upward mobility and all these other things, but in comparison to the ancient world, the differences are monumental. It's a complicated matter, but the point is that many people today go into poverty or they remain poor due to their own poor choices. It's vastly different than the reality of the ancient world. We should also try to identify who the poor are in our society, because it marks another striking difference between the modern and ancient world. I've heard that, globally speaking, $34,000 a year sets one in the top 1% of wage earners, which, if true, means that other than those who are essentially homeless, all of us are considered wealthy by global standards. But what about the homeless? What about those who are really poor? Well, according to one study, 80% of the chronically homeless are either drug addicts or they are severely mentally ill. Now, obviously, those with severe mental illness should be taken care of, and if they are abandoned by their family, they are like the widows and orphans of the past. They are vulnerable, and the Christian system tells us that we are to take care of them. But I will tell you, from my experience of 14 years of ministry, the overwhelming majority of homeless people I have interacted with, besides the mentally ill and children, are grifters. In fact, I can only think of one in 14 years who at the end in our relationship I realized wasn't a grifter. Only one. Which is to say, these are lazy, immoral, indulgent, dangerous, foolish people who have burned every bridge, exhausted the kindness of everyone around them. In other words, they deserve to be homeless. And to continue to give them charity only rewards their folly. Paul said, "He who does not work, neither shall he eat." He actually means that. In modern Christianity, we have tried to dull that sharp statement. He doesn't really mean that, right? Not the person who can't work. The person who can't work can be taken care of, is to be taken care of. But the one who can work and will not work, he shall not eat, Paul says. Which means he should starve. We should not feed him. And guess what? He won't starve. He will start to work once he knows you are serious. So just as James' audience should have been more suspicious of the rich, because that's who were persecuting them, as James says. Today we, and I know this sounds shocking, but it's true, today we should be much more suspicious of the poor, for their poverty is often a sign of their impoverished character. And of course, I'm speaking generally, just as James is speaking generally. The point is that James's audience's bias ignored common sense. They were biased toward the very group which sought to take everything from them. And the same seems true for us today as a culture. We are biased toward the poor, the underprivileged, who also want to take from us what is rightfully ours. The rich do it by force, the poor do it through manipulation, at least until they become rich. Which means that perhaps one sign that we are acting with partiality is that our bias goes against common sense. All of which is to say that our circumstances are very different than those of the first century when James was writing this epistle. The primary exhortation of this section, which we must apply to our own day, using wisdom, by not just exegeting the text, but exegeting the culture that we live in. The primary exhortation is not to show partiality to either the rich or the poor, for to do so perverts justice and violates the royal law.